episode 33. Hello, thanks for tuning in to this special Wednesday night episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host for the show. Our special guest for tonight's show is Dr. William Lester. Dr. Lester, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
Okay, well, I am a native of the city of Atlanta, Georgia. I have been involved in researching and reading and studying as much about the paranormal or unexplained phenomena for many years, extending back into childhood when there was a lot less information at your fingertips. I've been a teacher, a classroom teacher, an education administrator for a number of years, and I kind of took those two areas of, education background and fascination with unexplained phenomena and established something called the American Institute of Metaphysics, which is an educational entity which allows people to have at their fingertips to study those things, which, similar to things that you discuss on your show, like Dogman and various other phenomena.
You have a podcast called Shadowland that I'm very fond of. I love listening to it. What made you decide to start that show?
I've done radio for maybe the past, 7 or 8 years on different networks in one format or another. And I just decided that I wanted to just do my own and kind of break free from the whole traditional radio universe. And I wanted to create my own show, my own format, and just basically do it the way I wanted to do it. So that was really what sparked me on. And, you're doing something very similar. You've created Dogman Encounters Radio. I wanted to do the same thing with Shadowland. Of course, on Shadowland, it's a general free-for-all with respect to the various different types of paranormal phenomena. We've just really launched, we've just done 7 or 8 episodes, and we certainly appreciate your kind words about it.
Well, you deserve it, and the show does too. If you're a fan of things that go bump in the night the way that I am, you could do a lot worse than tuning in to Shadowland. Please, Dr. Lester, tell us how we can tune into that show.
Absolutely. The show has its own Facebook page. If you're on Facebook, just type in Shadowland Radio, and that's going to be the first thing to pop up. That's the fastest way. We also run it on YouTube. We'll publish an episode on the Facebook page and on YouTube. And same thing, if you go to YouTube and type in Shadowland Radio or Shadowland Podcast, we're going to pop right up there. We do have a new website, a separate website, where we're also going to put the episodes, and that is Shadowland and it's YOLAsite, YOLASITE.com, Shadowland.yolasite.com. So either there, Facebook, or YouTube. If you're online, it's very easy to find it. We try to do a new show every 7 to 10 days, and we'll probably have a new episode published this coming Friday.
Well, great. I'm going to tune in like I always do. Just so you know, also, I'm going to post a link to that website that you just mentioned on the resources page of dogmanencounters.com so that listeners of this show can find it that way as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Because of your background and pedigree, there are so many interesting things to talk about here tonight. The first question for you that comes to mind would be, of all the cryptids that you know about and have consequently studied, where would Dogmen rank in that list?
It definitely would be right at the top in terms of the scariest, and definitely right up there with Bigfoot in terms of the most interesting, because you're talking about an anthropomorphic creature, a bipedal creature, a creature that walks upright and leaves footprints on the environment, and it's something that has been encountered by a lot of people, and it almost inevitably leaves them shaken, and I don't know if traumatized is too strong a word. I think in some cases it may be applicable, but I just find it so fascinating and just right at the top of the list because it's so frightening, and it begs such a question: how could something like this exist?
In prior conversations, Dr. Lester, I've shared with you the fact that I don't see the term werewolf and the term dogmen as being fungible terms. Do you see dogmen and werewolf, the terms, as being fungible?
Well, I think that, in fairness, the term werewolf would be applicable to the dogman creature only in terms of trying to relate to someone what it looks like. Most people, have seen werewolves, on TV shows and various films. And so I think it may be useful just to give a person, some context. What did this creature look like? Well, it looked like a werewolf. And generally people know what you mean. So to that extent, yes, but I would say to the extent of suggesting that they are one and the same, I would suggest no.
As you know, I couldn't agree more about that. Do you think, as far as werewolves and the term dogman, how they tie in together, do you think that possibly the whole dogman phenomenon is the reason why we have werewolf legends to begin with?
I think that is one of a couple of real possibilities, and I've talked about this before. If you go back in time far enough, and let's just, for the sake of this, of kind of fleshing out this theory, let's just say, dogmen have been among us for centuries or even longer, all right? And a person, sometime in the distant past, has a dogman encounter. Well, what are they going to be thinking? They're looking at this creature, which clearly has wolf-like features. However, it's walking upright. It's walking on two legs. Let's go through the logic process. Well, a regular wolf walks on four legs. Therefore, this is not a regular wolf. A man walks on two legs. So, if you are of a superstitious mind, you say to yourself, well, maybe through some form of witchcraft or some form of occult practices, a man has been somehow transformed into this wolf creature, and we have the legend of the werewolf. So, if this scenario is true, then the answer to your question would be yes, Dogman is responsible for our werewolf folklore.
You've answered the question about how the dogman phenomenon relates to werewolf legends, but how do you see dogmen correlating to the Bigfoot phenomenon?
Well, it's very interesting. I've heard, and I don't know, maybe you've had this experience too, I've heard Bigfoot researchers trying to incorporate the dogman as some form of Bigfoot. I've heard that. Now, I'm not sure if that's correct, because it seems to me, as I go through and review the different examples of encounters, that they seem to be entirely distinct creatures, Bigfoot seeming to have more primate characteristics or simian characteristics, or I think the word is hominoid or hominid characteristics, and the dogman seems to have decidedly canine characteristics that we associate with dogs, wolves, foxes, coyotes, etc. The other aspect, too, is that I don't think that there are examples of the Bigfoot having the typical canid-style knee configuration. To my knowledge, all of the reports of Bigfoot seems to have a lower leg configuration like ours. Is that something you have found?
I don't know of any cases of a Bigfoot being reported as having a canine leg structure like you expect to hear in a lot of Dogman encounters.
Right, so I think that they are two different, distinct things happening. And of course that just makes it all the more inexplicable that you would have these two large, imposing figures existing out there in the wilderness. It's disconcerting, especially to those people who have, we've heard of Bigfoot encounters, and we've heard of Dogman encounters, and in all cases, people come out of them forever changed.
Since we're talking about how Dogman and Bigfoot relate, why do you think there are so many people in the Bigfoot community that, for some reason, are so reluctant to accept the existence of Dogmen?
Well, it's territorial. We're studying Bigfoot, which is the big hairy creature of the forest, and there's no other big hairy creatures. And it sounds silly to put it that way, but that's really, in some cases, what it is. I think the other thing, too, is what we talked about a minute ago. It looks like a werewolf. The description of the Dogman is like a prototypical werewolf. And a lot of the Bigfoot researchers have kind of entrenched themselves into the idea that, okay, we are studying serious things. We are studying the existence of an anomalous North American primate. Certainly there are no werewolf-type creatures out there. That must be ridiculous. I think that a little bit of that is going on. And if you keep talking about this Dogman, you're going to undermine all of the credibility that we've built up.
That makes really good sense. Crossing over to the werewolf side, I know that you're very well read on werewolf folklore and legends and how they relate to various cultures from around the world. Could you please tell us about that?
The earliest example, to my knowledge, of this idea that we now know as the werewolf can actually go back to ancient Egypt. That's taken it pretty far back. There was a kind of book of prayer and incantation that the Egyptians called the Pertemru, which is the book of coming forth by day. Somehow Western scholars turned that into the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Okay? This is the first example where we see ritualized shape-shifting, turning men into animal forms, crocodiles, hawks, hippopotami, and finally into the shape of a serpent and then a wolf. And I think that from ancient Egypt, these ideas, these traditions kind of migrate the way they do historically into Greece and then later into the Roman world. Of course, that takes it over into Europe, where you start seeing the beginnings of what we would now recognize as those traditional Central and Eastern type superstitions, the vampire, the werewolf. But it goes all the way back, at least as far back as ancient Egypt. And of course, the Roman Empire, at a certain point, had a slow conversion to Christianity. And so it was an excellent opportunity to juxtapose the idea of a man turning into a wolf as the handiwork of the devil, Satan, the great adversary. So that is, how it's led up even until today.
Didn't you tell me in the pre-interview that cultures as far and wide as Japan have legends about werewolves as well?
Yes, the Aztec, the Zulu of southern Africa, even in Kenya and other parts of West Africa. In Japan, you have the story of the were hyena. in Africa, the were-crocodile, the Apache, the North American Apache, the Chiricahua Apache, the Mescalero, have stories of the werewolf. In many Native American traditions, they use the term skinwalker, which is a wizard or a witch that can transform himself into this horrific werewolf-type creature. You have the kitsune in Japan, which is like a were-fox, because the fox is regarded as a trickster, a deceptive, mischievous creature. And so these things exist all over the world.
Well, if I had to choose, I think I would much rather have to deal with a were-fox than a werewolf any day.
I would have to agree, especially if it looks and reacts and influences us the way the Dogman Encounters, or the type of influence that Dogman Encounters have had on people. There's also, to just piggyback on this kind of global werewolf folklore, there's also kind of an occult demonology, if you will, angle to this. And this is something that I've kind of picked up over the years from some people who I consider to be more learned than myself. And it's a very fascinating idea. Most people who research or study or paranormal enthusiasts are aware of spirit possession. Most of the time, we think of spirit possession as depicted in movies like The Exorcist or many of these type of programs. Some people in the demonology field have kind of categorized true werewolfism or lycanthropy in the category of spirit possession. And that gives it a very interesting dynamic that a lot of people may not think of. We talk about different kinds of spirits roaming our world, and some of these are elementals, which are spirits of things that have never existed physically, but which seek to experience a corporeal reality, the senses, all of the advantages that go with having five senses, okay? And it is these type of entities which seek to possess the body. And when this happens, and the spirit of a beast takes possession of a person, then this monster is brought to the fore. This horrific imagery, terrible fusion between man and wolf. And of course, this reaches back to our primordial past, when in prehistoric times, Homo sapien and Canis lupus were vying for being at the top of the food chain. The wolf has been our natural adversary since the very beginning.
You touched on the subject of possession, and I thought you were going to lead into the topic of why silver has been seen over the ages as a way to kill a werewolf. Please tell us about that.
Right, fascinating theory. Well, we all know that silver is an element, like many other elements that you can name, and as such, it radiates at a particular frequency. Now, it is true, everything in the universe has its own kind of frequency that it radiates at, but we're talking about silver. We're talking about the element silver. We also know that spirits themselves are composed of pure energy, and as such, they exist at a particular frequency. We all know that there are frequencies that are compatible, and there are frequencies that are not compatible. You know, we've heard terms like jamming the signal, or not being able to get a good signal, or incompatible frequencies. Well, the theory is the following. Silver radiates at a frequency that disrupts the spirit's ability to maintain possession of the human body. So the frequency of the silver is an incompatible frequency with that of the beast spirit. So, in a way, there are some fundamental physics at work. I've often thought that what we call supernatural or metaphysical are just really higher order physics that we haven't really come to grips with. So, if you stab the werewolf with a silver blade or a sword or a spear, the frequency that it radiates at disrupts the beast's ability to possess the body, and it immediately goes back into human form. And that is the theory. Now, of course, using silver bullets is problematic, because if you fire the bullets, how do you destroy the monster without destroying the man? And of course, that's one of the things that you see played out in film history going back decades.
I see. So what you're saying is, when you shoot a werewolf, if werewolves were real, if you shot one with a silver bullet, then it's not a situation where you've killed the werewolf so the man would automatically die because of the silver's influence on his body, but you're saying it's the silver that takes out the werewolf, and the actual physical trauma of being shot in the first place is what winds up killing the man.
Correct. The man is going to die because of exactly the trauma, the damage to internal organs, the loss of blood, and so forth, because it is a bullet. But the energy properties contained within would be sufficient to rid the body of this kind of paranormal contagion.
Well, since we're on this topic, something I want to run by you, something that I cannot make sense of whatsoever.
Okay.
Do you have any theories on why there are cases where a dogman has been shot with a high caliber rifle with seemingly no ill effects?
Very unusual, and I have been musing over this. Well, what are the possibilities here? Okay. Well, if these creatures have been shot and to a large extent unaffected, there's only a couple of possibilities here. Number one, every example of a dogman encounter where firearms are used, the hunters or the shooters have missed. That's one. Now, I don't think that that's the case. You know, I've heard accounts where you just are just about positive that the bullets found their target. The other possibility is that the dogman, the physiological makeup of the dogman is something that is so anomalous, so atypical, so outside the boundaries of what we know and understand, that these bullets are just not going to affect it the way we would expect it to affect any of the other animals that you would encounter in a wilderness situation. And the disturbing thing is, okay, what would those anomalous characteristics be? What do we have in nature that is analogous to that? I mean, most everything, most animals out there, if you shoot it, you're going to injure it. And if you hit it in the right place, or if you hit it enough times, it's going to die. A grizzly bear is a large, powerful, formidable creature. If you shoot it in the right place, it's going to die. Why is that apparently not the case with Dogman? I believe this creature has some anomalous characteristics. There's something about it that puts it slightly outside the boundaries of the known flora and fauna out there.
You've come forward and said that you think that there are certain qualities that dogmen have that puts them outside the boundaries that normally govern flesh and blood animals. Having said that, along those lines, do you think something to do with those unusual abilities that they have? Do you think that is why they seem to have the ability to affect human emotions in ways that no other documented animal has ever been able to do before.
I think you may be onto something. There's no question, based on numerous encounters with this creature, there's no question that this creature has a higher level intelligence than the typical forest animal. This creature seems to act with intent and not just instinct. And so I think whatever it is that's driving this creature, whatever it is that's different about this creature, is also what gives it a higher level intelligence. It may be as smart as we are, but I just don't know.
There's so many things that they do and so many things about them that are so hard to explain. While we're talking about things that are so hard to understand about them, why do you think they go so far out of their way for seemingly no other purpose than to scare the living wits out of eyewitnesses?
Even animals that are considered dangerous to humans will typically go out of their way to avoid people. The answer to the question may be a little distressing because it keeps us over into the area of mysticism, and that can be problematic. We know that there are entities that elicit fear in people because they feed on that fear. You know that emotions have real energy. We use these words in our everyday language and never think about it. We say red with anger and green with envy. And we say, I'm so mad that I can see red, or you're green with jealousy, etc. If you're a coward, you're called yellow. Well, these emotions irradiate real energy, real tangible energy, and these entities feed off of it. So a spirit may frighten you to generate fear, to feed off that fear. I'm wondering if what's behind the Dogman phenomena isn't doing the same thing. Because it seems to go out of its way to be imposing and intimidating and frightening. Not really attacking a person, not really doing harm to a person, but launching a devastating psychological attack.
In the instances, they are very far and few between, but in the instances where they actually have made contact and physically attacked a person, in an instant like that, where they had the eyewitness dead to rights, they could have easily killed those eyewitnesses, but they didn't. Do you have any ideas about why they might have done that when, if they wanted to scare that eyewitness, mission was already accomplished? They already had this eyewitness terrified within an inch of their life.
Mm-hmm. We're kind of speculating on how intelligent these things are and what their real intent is. It may be that every now and then there has to be a kill. We're just speculating. How many people are out swimming in the ocean and the giant killer shark just kind of swims by and is not even interested? You know that shark attacks are very rare, and yet, there's plenty of sharks in the ocean. Who knows what it is to make this shark attack in this moment, right? And just casually swim by hundreds of people in the water with no incident in another case. And nobody ever likes this answer. It may be that the occasional Dogman victim was just at the wrong place in the wrong time.
That does make really good sense. You just might be onto something there. Now, here's the $1 million question for you, Dr. Lester.
Uh-oh.
Giving how physically impressive they are, when you consider their strength, when you take into consideration how intelligent they seem to be, when you take into consideration also how at home they are out there in the woods, what do you think it would take to actually capture one?
Oh, wow. Now, I like that question because we can have some fun with this. I would say this, and I've been asked this question with respect to Bigfoot also, and I have pretty much the same answer. I would guess that it would take a couple of things. You get yourself a team of, let's just say, Army Rangers. You know, these guys with this intense, incredible, crazy survival training. The best in the world. You bring in, along with them, a legitimate zoologist or someone very well educated in zoological sciences. You also bring in an expert tracker, someone who has a long history and experience, big game experience, how to track an animal, how to look for signs of the presence of an animal. Then you also bring in a technical person, someone who can, you know, mash all the right buttons and make sure that everything's plugged in, whatever the various systems of tracking and monitoring, whatever technology can do. You got to have a tech guy out there. Now, of course, having laid out that laundry list, you can't do any of that without a lot of money. So it would have to be very well financed. But we're going under the assumption that these things are real, these things are out there. I think it is feasible under the circumstances that I just specified to capture one, or at least put yourself in the position where you can demonstrate objectively to the larger scientific community that this is a real creature.
Given the fact that you think that we could capture a dogman if we really put our minds to it and through the proper resources at the project, do you think that we should try to go out and capture one?
Wow. Well, I would say for the sake of the big picture and the larger necessity to learn as much as we can about everything, I'd say yes. It wasn't safe, and it may not have even been prudent to go to the moon. But it was in our best interest in terms of how much we could learn and how much it would expand our understanding of the universe. Now, I would say going to the moon is probably a lot harder than capturing Dogman, but I think it would serve the same purpose. Think about what we could learn. Think about the potentiality of what it could open up. If we could get a fix on what this thing is, maybe we can look at its behavior patterns, its DNA. I think that the upside trumps the risk. Now, having said that, I'm not advising a group of buddies to go trampling out in the woods, next weekend just to see if they can get lucky. We're talking about a well-orchestrated, well-financed team of professionals.
The hair always stands up on the back of my neck whenever I hear someone talk about just heading out into the woods where they think a dogman might be, or maybe where dogmen have been seen frequently, and they talk about it as if they're going to go bird watching or something like that. They don't seem to have any appreciation for the danger that they could be putting themselves into.
Well, I can understand why some people would have that attitude, but they really should pay attention to the case history of Dogman Encounters. If you study that, you'll learn very quickly. Being out in the woods with a gun, with a firearm, does not ensure your well-being with respect to this creature. It just does not. And so I would advise anyone who was so inclined, because it is fascinating, it is interesting, it is bizarre, and we want to know, what is this? What's going on? What's happening? Why is this thing out there? I understand that. But having a gun out in the wilderness is not a guarantee of your safety with respect to this creature. There are just too many reliable examples of people with firearms using firearms against the dogman and not having the desired effect.
If you think that we could capture a dogman, given the right resources again and tactics, what kind of effect do you think that would have on our society as a whole if everyone knew that they were out there?
Now, do I think that the woods would be flooded with dogman hunters? I think you might get a little bit of that. But I think also, once you establish that these things are real, I think you also can put regulations into place. There's regulations on hunting everything else, right? So I think if you're interested in trying to see if this thing could be protected through legislation, for example, I've said the same thing about Bigfoot. I've always said, look, let's get one dead one. And of course, I know that there are people who just lose their minds when you say that, but I think they're being naive. One dead one would probably ensure the survival of all the rest. Because, for example, if you have a dead Bigfoot, let's just imagine that we have a dead Bigfoot. Every congressman in Washington, D.C. is going to jump up and say, I want to propose legislation to make Bigfoot an endangered species. Every one of them. And it would pass in 5 seconds. It'd be the only policy that they would agree on unilaterally. All right. Now, here's something I also think will happen. Once you open that door a little bit, what starts to happen? Okay, Dogman is real. So what else is real? Well, okay, so Bigfoot must be real too. And Mothman must be real too. And Chupacabra must be real. You see what I'm saying? So I think there will be a cascading effect where the debunker will no longer be able to say, well, none of this stuff is real. Well, what about Dogman? You know, if Dogman is real, you think the idea of Bigfoot suddenly is ridiculous? No. I think that's one of the effects it'll have.
It is a really slippery slope, that's for sure. This is one of my favorite topics with regards to dogmen, the whole what if they are proven to exist topic. Staying on that topic, do you see any catastrophic trickle-down effects that might come to pass if all of a sudden dogmen were a reality, such as a mass exodus from the woods? I can't think of very many people that would want to go out and camp, go out and fish, go out and hike, go out and hunt if they knew that dogmen were out there and they might run into one. What are your thoughts on that? And also any consequent negative effects on our society, our economy as a result?
Well, I'll go back to what I said earlier. People know that there are sharks in the ocean. There's no speculation. We know 100% that there are sharks, there are big sharks, man-eating sharks. Does that deter people from going to the beach? I think it would be the same thing. There might be some initial drawback, there might be some initial reaction, because the story will be played very heavily in the media. But there are beaches, for example, in South Africa and in Australia where you have the biggest, most ferocious killer sharks in the largest numbers, and every summer their beaches are choked and packed and filled with vacationers. And they know that the risk is out there. You see? So I think eventually it'll be the same thing. Most Americans, or many Americans, or a large percentage of Americans, are willing to take a risk to enjoy and do the kind of things they want to do.
I can see where you're coming from on that theory, but in my opinion, I think since dogmen tie into the whole werewolf legend so closely, they look just like you would expect a werewolf to look. It's
right.
My opinion, Dr. Lester, that if it was proven one day that dogmen do exist, they are a reality, it's my opinion that the reaction would be much stronger from people than what you just talked about with regards to people still going to beaches, getting into the
right.
water, even though they know that South Africa has a huge great white shark population. I think that whole psychological monster thing would draw a much stronger reaction from people than what even giant sharks like great whites get out of people.
You may be, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'll tell you this. Both of those, the recognition of the great white shark and the presence of Dogman, both of those are enough to deter me. So, you know what I mean? So, how other people would react, I don't know. But if some super safari hunting team drug the carcass of a Dogman out of the woods tomorrow, that would be quite enough for me. Maybe other people have more courage than I do, but yeah, it would frighten some people off, for sure. But I would be really interested just to see the scientific fallout of it, the social fallout of it, and again, if Dogmen are real, and don't make any mistake, we tell kids that monsters aren't real. And for a lot of people, that's probably a sensible response. But you and I and other people happen to know that they are real.
I use that example a lot when I talk about why the Dogman phenomenon is so scary, why it affects us so severely. Like you said, ever since you were really young, your parents told you that monsters weren't real. And then all of a sudden one day you find out that they are, so it just turns your whole world upside down. If they're real, then like you mentioned earlier, what else is real? So it's so hard to know what to believe and what to expect. I think that's one of the reasons why it's such an uncomfortable topic. Moving on, I know you're familiar with the whole David Pilates missing 411 issue. In your opinion, do you think that dogmen play a major role in all these cases of missing people out in the wilderness?
Well, when you look at this creature, you're talking about a large, in some cases it's 7, 8 feet tall. I can only imagine what this creature's physical strength actually is. We know that it has the typical predatory accoutrements, the fangs, the claws, etc. So in other words, it has the ability to maim, to kill a human being, probably with relative ease, to the extent that a person in an unfortunate circumstance may never be seen again. And so I would say yes. I think that with the knowledge that these things do exist, and the knowledge that there are these people who go missing, unseen, in some cases maybe even unreported, I think it's absolutely fair game or fair play to say that dogmen may be playing a role. I wouldn't dare speculate on what percentage, because I also think Bigfoot plays a role in this.
I can't imagine a worse way to go out than to be out in the woods and have a dogman attack you and take you out. That's just absolutely horrible. You mentioned the weapons that they bring to the table. You mentioned the fact that Sasquatch might also be responsible for a lot of the cases of missing people. Because of the weapons that dogmen have, do you see dogmen as being more pernicious than Sasquatch?
It seems so. It seems to, if you listen to the reports of the encounters, they seem to have this quality about them that perhaps is not attributed to the Sasquatch. There are cases of the dogman, for example, attacking farm animals, chickens, and so forth, and not really eating them. Now that, to me, suggests just a certain level of malevolence, because we also have cases of Bigfoot killing farm or domestic animals, but it seems as though they are doing it for food purposes. Okay? This dogman creature seems to just have a bloodlust killing the animal and just walking away, leaving the carcass strewn about, and so forth. So there seems to be an added dimension of malevolence with the Dogman.
That just goes right back to the topic of things that they do that are just so hard to understand or explain. I never will. Do you think that someday down the road, these things ever will be proven to exist?
I hope so. I hope so. Here's the thing. Researchers have been looking at the Bigfoot question for a much longer time. I'm not really sure if there is a real pecking order, but we've only really started looking seriously at the Dogman, I guess, since about the 90s, I would say, seriously. So it's going to take a while to kind of manifest more vigorous, more comprehensive research than we've seen, expeditions and so forth. I would like to think that, yes, at some point we will muster the requisite resources to do so.
If that day ever does come to pass, it's going to be very interesting to see how people react. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share with us?
I've enjoyed being on the show. I've been, of course, a fan of the show, and I think it is so very important that we have a program like this that's focusing specifically on this phenomena, because I feel that in all of the kind of the universe of unexplained phenomena, this is one of the most important of the emerging fields. So I was very happy to take part in the conversation today.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here. Well, thanks again so much for coming on. It's been wonderful talking with you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for your time. Well, as you know, please don't be a stranger, okay?
All righty.
I appreciate it, Dr. Lester. Have a great night.
You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye. If you've had a Dogman encounter and you want to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.